Okay, so it appears that the NBA has decided to go ahead with their batshit crazy lottery reform proposal. It's called the 3-2-1 lottery proposal, and it is literally like it's almost like one of those signals that we're like we have arrived at the dystopian future or something. It is so insane and convoluted and disconnected from anything that an average fan or the sort of the casual fan that makes up the bulk of people that watch live sports, right? The people that aren't watching the NBA right now, basically, when you look at the NBA ratings, they're lacking in the casual fan, right? Diehard NBA people are still very interested. It still rivets them, but the casual fan isn't all that interested in the NBA right now for whatever reason. And this 3-2-1 lottery system is literally like prime example of just how disconnected these NBA executives are from like the average sports fan. So let's just take a look at this the article on it here. This is from Tim Bontemps, published yesterday. NBA's Board of Governors votes to expand lottery, addresses tanking problem. Okay, so there's a video here where Shams is sort of giving this reporting. Let's just give this a watch real quick. I'll just turn this music off just in case there's music in the video.
The Board of Governors meeting, it just wrapped up. What exactly did they decide on how the draft lottery is going to look moving forward?
Malika, sources tell me that the NBA's Board of Governors has voted and approved new anti-tanking rule changes, draft reform moving forward.
Why do these insider reporter people why are they have such a stiff cadence and it's always the same oh shoot, I just saw my cat run across the yard. They have such a stiff cadence and he literally sounds exactly like Adam Schefter does when Adam delivers the report. It's like the Board of Governors has passed specific new anti-tanking rules. It's like, why is it always delivered like that? I don't know. Are they reading it? Or is it because they're just barely remembering what they're supposed to say because they've had so little time to memorize a little passage? It's just funny how they all these insiders have this very stiff robotic way of delivering these bits of news.
Starting in the 2027 NBA draft, the draft lottery will now move from 14 teams to 16 teams. Overall, there will be flattened odds, but most importantly, the bottom 3 teams will be punished.
Okay, so just right off the bat, if you're moving from 14 teams to 16 teams in the lottery, I mean, just on a surface level understanding, does that not just immediately make it seem like now you're opening it up for more teams to tank? Right? Because now if you're sniffing one of these six, again, and I said this in a previous video, if you're sniffing even slot number 16, right? That means that you're right on the bubble of a play-in team, so you could go to the playoffs or you could tank into this lottery. So basically what you're now motivating teams that could potentially make a run to the playoffs to instead tank for the lottery, right? Whereas before, if you had any chance of getting into the playoffs, or if you were a play-in team, you were far enough away from that 14th slot to where it wasn't really all that realistic to tank instead of, reward your fans with a playoff game. But now, all you have to be is in the bottom 16. So that's basically some teams that are looking at themselves as play-in teams are also looking at themselves as a potential lottery team. I don't know. That doesn't seem to make any sense. And then at that point, if you're a team that's on the bubble between a potential play-in team or possibly in this lottery, well, if you make the decision in your mind, all right, we're just going to go into the lottery, well then don't you now want to try to get down into teams 4 through 10? Okay, so the play-in team, oh my gosh, this is insane. Okay, we need to listen to more of this.
with lessened odds moving forward for the #1 overall pick. It's called a 3-2-1 lottery reform because now if you're a bottom 3 team, you will actually be penalized with lesser lottery balls, as in 2, than other potential teams that are slotted 4 through 10. I'm told the vote passed 29-1. The Memphis Grizzlies were the lone team to vote against, and that's because they have the Utah Jazz pick next year that now, because of the new rule, which has a couple stipulations, one being you can't pick #1 in back-to-back years. The second stipulation is you can't have a top 5 pick in 3 consecutive years. So that Jazz pick now will not be able to be a top 5 pick. The Grizzlies.
Okay, so teams cannot pick #1 in consecutive years. That feels like a fluff statement. Like, how often does that really even happen? Let's ask Claude here. New chat. How often has an NBA team been awarded the #1 overall pick 2 years in a row? Okay, so this is what Claude had to say about it. And just to give you an idea of this AI stuff, and granted, like I believe that what it's saying here is correct, but like just to point out quickly like how like odd this and finicky this AI stuff is. Look, at the top of this answer it says clearly it has happened 5 times in any NBA history. 5 times. Here's the full list pulling from the all-time #1 pick records. Well, it then gives 6 instances or examples, and then a 7th, like honorable mention, and then it says, so it's happened at least 6 times across NBA history. So it starts off by saying clearly it happened 5 times in NBA history. In the same answer, it says it has happened at least 6 times in NBA history. Anyways, so the notable examples from anything that could be considered relatively recent or modern are the Houston Rockets in 83 and 84 getting Ralph Sampson in 83 and Hakeem Olajuwon in 84, right? The Orlando Magic in 92 and 93, 2 straight #1 picks taking Shaquille O'Neal and Chris Webber in 93, and the Cleveland Cavaliers in the 2013-2014 Cavaliers won back-to-back #1 picks, making it their 2nd consecutive top pick and their 3rd #1 overall in a 4-year span. Okay, so they got 3 out of 4 in those 4 years. They were very, very bad. They took Anthony Bennett in 2013 and Andrew Wiggins in 2014. Neither one of them very good #1 overall picks. Bennett, a complete bust. Disaster pick. And then the 76ers in 2016 and 2017, Sixers had consecutive #1 picks with Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz. Both pretty bad. It's happened 3 times in anything that can be considered relatively recently. I mean, twice, honestly. Is the 90s still recent, right? It's 2026. So it happened at the beginning of the 90s. It happened in 2013, 2014, and 2016. So it happened twice in the 2010s. They're acting like they throw in these statements. Teams cannot pick #1 pick in consecutive years. Like that hasn't really made all that much of a difference. Think about that, like what we just talked about. None of these represent some franchise-changing 2 picks. I mean, you could argue the Magic in '92 taking Shaquille O'Neal and then Chris Webber. Those are 2 great picks. Did it revolutionize their franchise? No. Like I don't, did the Orlando Magic even have a title to their name? I'm not sure they do. These statements are things that they throw in because they don't know what else to say, and they're not actually all that confident in this proposal, right? They're like, teams cannot get pick #1 in consecutive years. It's like, okay, that doesn't really mean anything. Like,
are receiving the bad end of an unintended consequence from what is now for the NBA a radical response to radical behavior. The NBA felt that there were nearly 8 to 10 teams jockeying for lottery odds down the stretch of this season, and the goal from the relegation zone is right now to try to get those bottom 3 teams to compete to stay out of that area and have more lottery balls, and for teams that are slotted 4 through 10 to not be in that relegation zone because you don't want to be there because you have lessened odds. So trying to incentivize winning, and this comes after months and months of conversations, debate, brainstorm. And Malika, one more point to add. With this vote, the Board of Governors have now given Adam Silver increased disciplinary authority to implement a wide range of action depending on tanking violations moving forward. Fines up to $10 million. He can take draft picks away. He can also have teams forfeit their picks. He can change picks. He can change odds. So this now gives Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner,
Oh,
increased
great.
authority.
Adam Silver. That's just great. We want him to have all the power. Okay, so hopefully you're still completely confused, because I believe that would make you a normal person. Let's try to read through some of this this article and see if we can make any more sense of this insane thing. The NBA's Board of Governors voted overwhelmingly Thursday to change the league's draft lottery format beginning with the 2027 NBA draft. The league announced the new format expands the lottery from 14 to 16 teams, including the 8th seed in each conference playoffs picture. And okay, so that is confirming what I was saying, the 8th seed in each conference playoffs picture, meaning the 8th seed on each conference, which has, the opportunity through the play-in to play into the tournament, the playoffs. They're also they also get a lottery ball. So they could these teams that are in the play-in tournament could potentially get the number 1 overall pick. I mean, this just seems insane. This seems like you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. Because you're just like trying to make it appear even across the board so that it's like, well, we're not motivating teams to tank. But it's like at the end of the day, and it sounds counterintuitive, but the teams that the worst teams should get the best picks, right? Without motivating teams to tank. It's such a hard thing to produce, but I mean, look at the NFL. The NFL does it successfully pretty much every year. The tanking gets pretty much, the tanking is, there's a lid kept on the tanking until like the last couple of games, and it's only by like the worst teams competing for that number 1 pick, right? So I'll grant the NBA that it's more complicated, but that is what they're there to figure out, is to figure out how to do these things. And anyways, let's continue with this article. Including the 8th seed in each conference playoffs picture, and adds anti-tanking measures where the bottom 3 teams are dealt lesser chances for the number 1 pick while flattening odds for teams that do not qualify for the playoffs or the play-in tournament. The new 3-2-1 lottery was put together over the past couple of months and signifies the number of ping pong balls each of the final 3 teams will receive in the lottery. Most importantly, from the league's perspective, the new format disincentivizes teams from tanking and finishing with the worst records, a rampant problem the league has experienced with teams in recent years as they try to accumulate the best possible lottery odds for the draft top pick. Okay, so let's keep reading. The vote was 29-1, sources told Sharanya, with only the Memphis Grizzlies voting against the measure. I have more respect for the Memphis Grizzlies now. I kind of like them. I kind of like them a little more now after reading that. Since October, the league's office has met with key stakeholders to discuss current competitive incentives and solicit ideas aimed at discouraging tanking, the league said in announcing the changes. That process led to the creation of the 3-2-1 lottery. Okay, so I think I like what I'm hearing in terms of like the actual worst couple of teams or the worst handful of teams will actually get less balls than that middle tier. But just in the sense that now you won't have the Grizzlies actually competing with the Jazz to like do worse than each other. Like they actually there was like a game in the middle of the season this year, or the end of the season this year, where the Jazz were playing the Grizzlies and they were actually trying to out tank each other in the game, meaning like they were trying to lose this game. Each had like a literal team of like homeless people on their, on the floor for them. So I think you'll avoid that in a sense. So the very overt tanking might be avoided just in the sense from those worst teams, like actually battling it out for that worst position. You may have mitigated that some. My only problem is you strengthen the 4th worst through 10th worst team in the lottery, right? You've now made that the sweet spot for getting the most amount of balls, and you've made the actual amount of teams that can consider themselves lottery teams bigger. So have you made it so those teams that are now going to consider themselves a lottery team and know they don't really have a chance to go far in the playoffs, they'd probably get knocked out in the first round, are you going to motivate them to try to get down into that middle tier 4 through 10 position where you're actually getting the best chance to get the number 1 overall pick? I feel like that's an obvious result here, right? Like you've mitigated the worst teams from being extremely overt with their tanking, but you've actually made the teams that could potentially see themselves as a tanking team, you've made that pool bigger in a sense, right? The league will also wield expanded disciplinary authority to address tanking, including the ability to reduce teams' lottery odds, modify teams' draft positions, and impose significant fines on offending teams as part of the new lottery format. Yeah, I don't know about this because how much, I don't know, what can Adam Silver really do that's really going to curb the behavior of teams? Like, you can't fine a team. Like, he can only fine teams so much, right? There's never going to be an amount that any of these billionaire owners really cares about. Reducing their lottery odds, I guess, we're going to have to see. Again, you're giving all this power to Adam Silver, though, and how has he really shown? I mean, he's done so many different things. The 65-game rule, the All-Star game insanity. He's done so many different things that have just made no sense. Are we really going to trust him to, like, regulate this appropriately? It just, I don't have a lot of faith in that. But I do think in general, the ability to discipline these teams that are clearly doing this, that's probably a good thing. So you have to give it to them there. Under this format, the teams with the 3 worst records will each get 2 ping pong balls, while the teams with the 4th through 10th worst records will each get 3 balls. The 3 worst teams will now have a floor of picking 12th in the draft, further disincentivizing them from wanting to be bad. Okay, so again, this is just confusing. While the teams with the 4th through 10th worst records will each get 3 balls, the 3 worst teams will now have a floor of picking 12th in the draft, further disincentivizing them from wanting to be bad. How will that work, though? I don't understand. How can they be guaranteed a pick if their ball just doesn't come up, though? I don't know. We're going to see. The cool thing is, too, with this is they're actually going to do this live, the actual lottery part of it, where the balls are, like, actually popping out of the machine. They've announced they're going to actually do that live on TV, so we'll get to see sort of, like, how the actual lottery works live, the actual lottery machine. Okay, so the numbers 9 and 10 play-in seeds in each conference will receive 2 lottery balls each, and the losers of the 7-8 play-in games will receive 1 lottery ball each. Previously, the league drew odds only for teams with the bottom 4 records in the league, while the other 10 lottery teams were ordered by inverse record. Under this proposal, all 16 teams would be in the drawing. One that sources said likely will be done live next year. Okay, so there it is. Either going from 1 to 16 or more like it is unveiled currently from 16 to 1 to build more suspense. That makes sense. Teams will also no longer be able to get the number 1 pick in back-to-back years. Yeah, again, I don't think that really makes much of a difference. It's just sort of a little fluff part of it. Make it seem like there's more to it than there really is. Which they don't even need to do because it's already completely convoluted. The proposal includes a sunset provision that will see this format expire after the 2029 season, right when there's an opt-out of the current collective bargaining agreement. Okay, so you can literally... They're gonna frame this as the NBA is so flexible. So smart. Really, all this means that they have no faith that this proposal is actually going to make any sense, right? That they're like they don't. And this is funny. This is what Bill Simmons was saying, and I think I actually can grab that right here, and we can give that a listen. Okay, yeah, here it is. This was Bill Simmons on his podcast, Bill Simmons podcast, like this morning or like last night, I think, after the game, talking about the reform.
But somehow that didn't happen in the NBA. They did add the top 5 restricted thing. They did add the you couldn't win the picks 2 years in a row, the first pick. So I like that stuff, but I don't know. I feel like this could lead to some result that we're all completely horrified by, right? Like OKC having somebody's pick who's the 10th pick, and then OKC ending up with the first pick, or just some sort of thing where
So this is
we're like, oh, this was the worst case scenario and it happened. Because that's what happened.
Yes, 100%. This is, he's so right about this. This is what happens to the NBA. They end up with, they make a rule change, and they end up with they end up experiencing like the worst possible outcome from that rule change like right away, right? This happened with like the 65-game rule where within a couple of years of establishing this rule, you have players that are your clear favorites for certain All-NBA awards and MVP awards that are on the precipice of being ineligible for those awards, because they were actually out with like legitimate injuries and just barely, they played like 64 games instead of 65, right? Just a really dumb consequence. So you just end up with like a pool of players for some of these awards that's like missing some of the actual best candidates, and it just like doesn't make any sense. And those awards play a big role in some of the bonuses and some of the incentive structures in the contracts. So Yeah, I think what Bill Simmons is saying here is totally correct. This proposal is so convoluted and so just ridiculous. How could they possibly really know what like sort of the worst case scenario or the most bizarre result is going to be? And it's just like what is it called? Like Murphy's Law or someone's law. I don't know why I'm not remembering that right now. But where like the worst thing that can happen like always will or whatever. So yeah, I think, we're going to end up seeing some bizarre result within the next couple of years that where, we just realize that there's a massive hole in this proposal or this system that they sort of failed to foresee. One thing I think is interesting that's kind of missing from this, and now that we've pretty much covered most of it here, is there's no real reaction from like people in the league. Like, what do the GMs of the league think of this stuff? Like, what do the GMs think of some of these changes that Adam Silver has made to the draft over the last 2 years, or the 65 game rule, or some of these other changes that he's made? Because this particular change, the 3-2-1 lottery system, is one that directly affects like how GMs do their job, or it's the biggest effect that it has out of all the parties in the league is obviously going to be on the general managers, right? Because it has to do with team building and draft position and sort of the fantasy sports side of sports. And so the thing about the general managers in the league is far more than coaches. Usually the general managers tend to have the ear of the ownership, right? Like a lot of these GMs are in one way or another sort of buddy with the owners. During the games they sit up in the owner's box usually, or for many of the games they do, and they're just in more frequent and constant communication with the owners, right? They have to be because of the money. The owners are the ones that sign the checks, but the GMs are the ones that are sort of making the offers, so they have to be aligned with the owners on all that stuff, whereas the coaches are, I would say in most cases, less connected to the owners. Right, they are on the floor, during the games coaching. They're less involved with the money side in the business side of the team, the organization. So they have less communication with the owner because of that, right? The owner doesn't really know much about coaching a basketball team, at least in most cases. So he's going to have less to say about the coaching than he will about the business side, which is more what the GM is focused on, right? So the GMs, if they're getting sick of this draft lottery proposal, or if they're getting sick of these draft lottery changes, and this 3-2-1 lottery is just sort of another feather in that, in that cap of frustration over these changes, then if enough of them get in the ear of the owners and say like, this guy's crazy, like what is this proposal? It doesn't make any sense. It's so convoluted. It's going to encourage more tanking. These GMs are smart. They know how to evaluate these things and sort of see, how they can potentially turn out. So I think that'll be interesting, is when do these GMs start to get fed up enough with these changes where they're in the ears of the owners, actively sort of turning some of these owners against Adam Silver and his leadership. Let's see if there's any funny little YouTube shorts about this shit.
How would I grade these 2025 NBA draft picks in their...
Should the NBA start airing the entire NBA draft lottery live on TV? Well, in some great news, they're in talks to air on TV the actual lottery drawing process, the ping pong balls actually landing, as opposed to just the results as early as next season. Considering the new flattened odds lottery system, there'd be 7 teams with an equal chance of landing the #1 pick. This would be electric television. And if we're all watching in real time where the ping pong balls actually land, it could put to bed some of those conspiracy theories the internet runs with every year. The NHL...
What were these percentages? I like that. I like seeing that. Okay, so this is actually kind of interesting. Like, he's broken it down in terms of percentages here. The 4th through 10th worst teams all have about an 8% chance of getting the #1 pick, whereas the 1st through 3rd worst, so the worst through 3rd to last teams, all have about a 5.5% chance, which is the same as the 11th through 14th worst teams. And then the 15th and 16th worst teams both have about a 3% chance, which is still crazy though. Think about if the either the 15th or 16th worst teams, which are going to be the losers of the play-in games, if they get the #1 overall pick with their 3% chance, that'd be insane. Okay, but I do like what he's saying here. The lottery's going to be live, right? They're at least, you know, that's been leaked that the NBA draft lottery is going to be live now, the actual lottery portion of it, meaning the drawing of the balls. And you're going to have 7 teams or 8 teams, 4 through 10, so that's 7 teams, each with the same odds to get the #1 overall pick. That's going to be pretty interesting. It's definitely going to have some drama.
There'd be 7 teams with an equal chance of landing the #1 pick. This would be electric television. And if we're all watching in real time where the ping pong balls actually land, it could put to bed some of those conspiracy theories the internet runs with every year. The NHL has actually been doing this the last 2 seasons, makes for great television. I want the NBA to join in on this as well. But would you watch the full NBA draft lottery on a live broadcast? Should the
I have exciting news. We have officially reformed the NBA draft lottery into the 3-2-1 draft.
Look at this. This is Adam Silver, obviously. I mean, how could you mistake him?
Draft lottery, which now means that the 4th worst team in the NBA now actually has the best odds to win the #1 overall pick.
Oh, that makes total sense. Why are we doing this again?
We're doing this to prevent tanking, an act where you purposely lose games to better your chances of a higher pick. So now we're actually not going to improve the teams that are actually bad, and we're going to have teams that try to compete a little bit but still want to suck and try to get that 4th overall slot. And also, by the way, you cannot have 3 consecutive years of picking in the top 5 picks.
Okay, but what about the teams who actually try but still suck?
Tough shit.
Damn.
Tough shit. You also cannot have the #1 pick in back-to-back years. So yeah, that's also something we're going to do.
I don't know, man. I feel like this might not be the best thing for us.
I believe this is for the best effort of the league. A league that, you know, we've made some shitty decisions recently, but, you know, this one will surely be up there with some of the worst ones. Yes. I have excited.
It's so ridiculous. You know what this perfectly expresses is just how convoluted and ridiculous his proposal is, because it's like he's trying to explain what is the purpose of this proposal, right? And he's trying to include all the different aspects of it in his explanation, so he has to keep going with his run-on sentence of well, we're trying to make it so this happens, but also these guys do this, and then the worst teams don't get rewarded, but then also, and it's just I don't know, anything like that you have to go on and explain. Is that really going to be easily it's so unrelatable, this system. No normal fan is going to have any idea how this works, and even among the diehard fans, it's going to take it's going to be only the upper crust of the intelligent diehard fans that can actually understand this thing. So the other funny thing that he points out is that a team cannot have a top 5 pick for 3 consecutive years. So how many years is it going to be before we just have see, that could be part of the way where we just end up getting this bizarre result from this system, right? Because just a couple of years, you could have 2 or 3, 4 teams that all can't get the #1, can't get a top 5 pick. They're just barred from getting the top 5 pick because of that rule where you can't get a top 5 pick 3 seasons in a row. So it's going to be the 4 teams that you'd expect to have good odds in the lottery. They all are not going to be able to get a top 5 pick. So they're just going to go to someone else. It just makes no sense. Okay, so this was the other article from Tim Bontemps, who's sort of been on this. He's the one that's been on this story for ESPN. And I think it just came out later in the day yesterday after he released sort of his first story on the Board of Governors expanding the lottery. Where in this one, he kind of goes into some more of the pros and cons. He's pointing out one of the pros that I was identifying as well, which is that the absolute basement of the league, you actually don't want to be there, right? So you don't want to be one of the bottom 3 worst teams. So you are incentivizing the absolute basement dwellers to actually work their way into at least the 4 through 10 worst teams, which is probably confusing in and of itself as I say that, but it's just what it is now. This season, the Washington Wizards lost 27 of their final 28 games to ensure the league's worst record of 17-65. Their 2 high-profile additions, Trae Young in December and Anthony Davis just before the February trade deadline, played a combined 5 games as the franchise chased a guaranteed top 5 pick. So they sat all their stars and they lost all their games down the stretch. Similarly, the Memphis Grizzlies finished the regular season 5-28, to sink to 6th worst in the league, much like the 76ers did down the stretch of the 24-25. in an attempt to keep the top 6 protected pick that became Rookie of the Year finalist VJ Edgecombe. Okay, so again, you're disincentivizing the absolute basement dwellers from like maintaining their position at the bottom of the league, which I think is probably a good thing in a sense. It's on its surface sounds good, right? So one of the cons he's pointing out is this is actually kind of interesting here. So he agrees that the rule about a team not being able to get the number 1 pick in back-to-back years is a little bit ridiculous, or those type restrictions are sort of ridiculous. Here's what he says. Given this format heavily slants towards random luck, it's odd to include restrictions that would reduce that. Team cannot win back-to-back lotteries or pick inside the top 5 for 3 consecutive drafts. Okay, so the problem, not all drafts are created equal. For every Wembanyama, LeBron James, or even the 2026 star-studded class, there are examples like Bargnani, Anthony Bennett, and Greg Oden, number 1 picks who never lived up to their billing. It shouldn't be seen as a disappointment for a team or its fans to land the first pick in a weak draft and have no chance of doing so the next year in a better one. That's such a good point. What if you get the number 1 overall pick and he's just a total dud? He's just a total stinker, right? Like, granted, that is a mistake on the part of the GM, but sometimes they just get injured, right? Or sometimes they have a bad work ethic, or they're a freaking alcoholic at the age of 19 or whatever it is, right? Sometimes it's things you can't really predict or foresee. So you get a number 1 pick, he's awful, and now you can't get the number 1 pick next year, even if you rightfully should get it. You had the proper record and you won the lottery or whatever. That doesn't seem to make any sense. Having the rule in general doesn't make any sense because like I broke down, when we asked AI, it hasn't even happened that often. It hasn't been a team getting the number 1 pick 2 years in a row hasn't been some problem with the draft. There's been so many other problems with the draft that should have been addressed, right? A team getting a number 1 pick 2 years in a row has not been something that like teams have been able to use time in and time out in order to rebuild their franchises. It just hasn't been. Okay, so this appears to be why the Memphis Grizzlies voted it down here, right? Like another con he's pointing out here is changing the value of traded future picks. This is probably the most controversial ripple effect of the rule change. Because this is such a radical departure from how the league has previously done business in the draft, the fact that a lot of picks have already been moved in the 2027, 2028, and 2029 drafts now could have a much different value assigned to them. A team immediately affected is Memphis. Because the Utah Jazz had the number 5 pick last year and the number 2 pick this year, their pick will be unable to land in the top 5 next season. That immediately devalues an asset Memphis acquired only 3.5 months ago in exchange for Jalen Jackson Jr. Those sources said there was okay, so the Memphis Grizzlies traded for a Utah Jazz pick, and now because the Jazz have this restriction on them where they can't have a top 5 pick for 3 seasons, that pick that the Memphis Grizzlies traded for is no longer going to be in the top, or has a chance to be in the top 5. Because of this new lottery system. So that's why the Memphis Grizzlies were like, fuck this system. Like, we don't want this. Which is totally understandable. And that's what you're going to end up with. You're going to end up with these weird situations where teams just can't get a top 5 pick because they happen to have had one over the last 2 seasons. And whereas, like, if you asked any person in the league, like, do you believe it's unfair that this team has a top 5 pick for a 3rd season in a row? Almost no one would say, yeah, that they shouldn't, right? Like, no one cares about that. That hasn't been a problem. So how those rules really address tanking, it doesn't really seem to make any sense. Another issue he identifies here is I touched on this as well. The 3-1 lottery largely accomplishes Silver's mission, but it's not perfect. In fact, from the moment it was created, the format has been accompanied by a sunset clause. The entire process will be revisited before the 2030 draft. Overhauling a critical component of the NBA ecosystem only to potentially do it again in 3 years doesn't exactly scream long-term solution to curb tanking. Perhaps the format changes will stick beyond 2030. Perhaps, as league insiders have mentioned for weeks, that the new draft credit system will eventually be put into place that will emphasize smart roster management even more than the current rules. But for now, providing the new lottery system with an out before it even takes effect sends the wrong message. More changes are probably coming. Oh gosh, the NBA has no idea what they're doing. They're just throwing out random crap. The draft credits thing is interesting. I think I'm gonna look into these draft credits thing and possibly do another video on like what that is even about. Yeah, because I don't think this system's gonna last very long. I think it's just too ridiculous. And again, if enough GMs, they have the ears of the owners. If enough GMs don't like this crap, they'll just complain, right? And eventually these complaints are going to come back on Adam Silver. They have to. There's no way this guy can just keep getting away with making these absurd changes to the league. having it go south, and he just continues on, you know, smiling in the press with his big bald head. You know, giving these you know, watered down corporate speak answers and never actually addressing anything or fixing anything. Anyways, thought that was an interesting story, and you know, if we get any more info on any of this, we'll talk about it some more. Appreciate anyone listening.